I think public perception is something that's really important and we need to really think about and be aware of. And again, continually engage with people in different ways. But I love those social media stories that we can really kind of tell a little bit of some of those things that you wouldn't necessarily know if you were just coming to the zoo, and kind of that behind the scenes look. Part of the positive of social media.
This episode of the Attraction Pros podcast is brought to you by our friend Eric Fluet at Get It Done Marketing.
With 30 years of experience in the attractions industry, Get It Done Marketing offers freelance marketing insight, strategy, and execution at a fraction of the cost of a full-time hire.
Partnering with over 30 parks and resorts, from family water parks to large multi-location organizations, Get It Done Marketing fills leadership voids on property, and corporate marketing teams assists with resource allocation and supports emerging marketing professionals.
Learn more at getitdonemarketing.com. Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going fantastically, Josh. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for asking.
Excellent.
Question for you.
Yes, sir.
Approximately how many hours a day would you say you sleep?
Can I say it depends?
Yeah.
I'm going to say, on average, roughly 6.
Really?
6 hours.
I expected more from you.
Yeah.
I mean that like literally, not like I expected more from you.
What about you, father of 2?
On a good night, so I've been trying to like wake up really early, and I a lot of times I'll set my alarm for 5, and then I could like I prep my coffee maker the night before, so I wake up, I brew coffee, and it's dark, and I can like get sometimes close to 2 hours worth of work done by myself, and there's no distractions, and I'm not getting emails, and nobody in the house is up. So on days when I ambitiously want to get up at 5, it's pretty exciting for me when I can be asleep. I am slightly embarrassed to say before 9 p.m. Doesn't always happen, but at or around 9 p.m., then I'm like, oh, I can have a 5 o'clock wake up tomorrow. These are the things that I get excited about these days.
Yes, yes.
So I will say I always strive for 8 hours. Last night was closer to, it wasn't 6, it was like 7. Stayed up, I watched some TV, which I've been doing, but I've been really bad at watching a lot of TV lately. I need to get a lot better. I only watched the first couple episodes of Severance. I haven't started the new season of White Lotus yet. I'm just really falling behind. But the reason I ask is because we learned in this interview that we did with Shimerdla that a lion sleeps for, about a lot of hours.
Are you going to leave it open? And
yeah, I'll leave it open. You gotta listen more to find out.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. More than 6, more than 8.
It is true that lions sleep a lot. And we came across this bit of information and the concept or the topic because we talked a lot about animal welfare with Anne, and she was talking about the mental health of the animal and the social aspect of what some animals are needing in terms of how they are cared for. And to me, it was a really interesting way to talk about animal welfare and how they are presented to the public, because it's not just about the physical, do they have a good environment and are they eating enough? But there's a whole different level when you get into talking about the mental capacity or the social elements of what an animal in a zoo, like the Blank Park Zoo, which is where Anne works, where they live and how they are cared for.
Mm-hmm. And also that song, The Lion Sleeps Tonight, could also be the lion sleeps during the day too, as we'll find out the number of hours. I digress. So yes, those were some of the really good points made. We also talked about balancing recreation with education, and I know it's a topic that has come up a number of times when we talk to people from zoos and museums and aquariums, and I think it's an important one to have because we're in the attractions business, we're in the business of fun, and we're talking about a segment of the attractions industry that is heavily focused on conservation and research and education. But the recreation side of it is what fuels that mission. And one of the things that Anne said is that we can't do our mission without the attractions component. That is the part that sells tickets, that gets people to the zoo, that brings the families, and there's the souvenirs and the food and beverage, and that feeds the rhino, right? And it helps the lion sleep, right? It gets them well fed so that they can sleep, right? We cover that component of really balancing the recreation along with the educational component as well.
And Anne also tied in kind of her leadership style in terms of how she kind of leads the organization, but also focuses on who the really important people are. And she shared something that was really interesting. I'm not going to give the spoiler away, but she talks about who the least important person is in the organization.
So, should we head on out to Des Moines, Iowa, to Blank Park Zoo for this interview with Anne Shimerdla?
Let's do it.
Hey, Anne, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. We are so excited to have you on today. How are you?
Very good.
Excellent. So let's kick off here. We'd love to know a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your background. Tell us about your career.
Okay, well, I'm excited to be here and talking with you. I'm not used to talking about myself. I usually talk about the zoo field, the zoo, but just a little bit of background about me. I actually started 28 years ago working as an intern at the zoo and had the opportunity to start here at Blank Park in Des Moines. I went to Iowa State University. That's how I was involved with Blank Park here. And then I moved up to Duluth, Minnesota, and I was the education curator at the Lake Superior Zoo in Duluth for a few years before having the opportunity to come back to Des Moines. And I've been here ever since. So when I moved back, I was the education curator and then took on some operations roles, took on some HR roles, and just kind of eventually escalated up to my current position as CEO.
Just CEO, that's all.
Just CEO, yeah. I would say that probably the least important person here is the way I always look at it.
That's funny.
So.
Well, we're gonna get into all that, but I also want to ask, working in the zoo field for so long, was it a passion for animals that brought you in, or did you develop that kind of as you worked in the industry for so long?
It was definitely a passion for animals from the very beginning. So from the time I was little, I wanted to be a veterinarian. And I actually wanted to be a veterinarian up until college. So when I started at Iowa State in the pre-vet program and quickly realized that veterinarian is not in my skill set and needed to think about something else. So started looking around, wound up with an ecology degree as an undergrad. So thought about doing working out in the wild and being the next Jane Goodall, working, out in the field. And then I like to talk too much, so that's not always conducive to research. And so decided to look at other opportunities and really by chance had the opportunity to come to the zoo and listen to who was the education manager at the time, talk about zoo careers, and then started an internship here and decided that this really was a good fit. So I was able to really look at not only the education side of it, but also kind of combining that with the animal passion and in a whole different way, and still have an impact on the world. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So for those who might not be familiar, can you walk us through Blank Park Zoo? Tell us about the zoo and the experience.
Sure. So Blank Park Zoo, we're considered maybe a smaller to medium size organization. So we have about 30 acres that are developed right now. We have about another 20 acres that we can develop in the future as part of our long-term master plan. From a budget perspective, we're about $10.5 million on budget, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit. And so that's really something that's a little bit different than maybe some of our other attractions colleagues. So we're really, everything that we do revolves around our 4 pillars of our mission, which are conservation, education, research, and recreation. So every decision we make follows those 4 pillars. And then a lot of being in a zoo is really balancing that conservation mission and education with the attractions, because we need people to come to the zoo to fulfill our mission.
And can you talk a little more about that balance? Because I would imagine that that's a daily balance that you have to kind of keep in your mind and within the operation. So how do you kind of maintain that?
So maintain the balance, everything that we do, we really look at what value does it have, either from a conservation education standpoint, again, trying to keep our mission at the forefront. So, and then I always kind of joke, I said I have my ecology side of me, and then I have my master's in business administration. So then I have the business hat, of trying to go back and forth. But we cannot do our mission without the attractions component. And so making sure that we're engaging our community. Right now, we have an audience of about 500,000 people a year that we engage, which is second largest in the state of Iowa for cultural attractions. And so for us, that's a big deal of constantly looking at how can we continue to engage people in different ways and provide opportunities for them to get excited about the things that we do here. So people are really looking for experiences. That's, in the attractions world, that's when you have to make so many decisions on your personal time. So we try and constantly look at how can we better people's experience here, which hopefully then connects you to our mission.
Could we go a little bit deeper onto that? And I like how you said
Absolutely.
you can't do the mission without the attractions component of it. So I wonder if we can actually kind of maybe unpack that a little bit more, and sort of whether it's flow of dollars to saying, well, in order to feed the rhino, we need to sell tickets, and in order to do that, well, it needs to all, like we said, kind of balance together. But curious as far as really connecting all those dots.
Absolutely. So it really connects in a couple of different ways. So one is looking at dollars. So I have to pay to care for the rhinos. I have to pay for vet care on all of our animals. We have about 3,000 animals at the zoo that we care for daily. And that counts every little coral or insect all the way up to our rhinos and our giraffe and tigers. And so thinking about those costs that are associated with the care of those animals. And then we also have to look at that connection component. So if people are not engaged with our animals, or if people do not find that connection or their passion, my goal is when I want you to come to the zoo, I want you to find your passion. So everybody has a favorite animal. So what is your favorite animal, and how are you connecting with that animal? And that's where you kind of find that balance a little bit with mission and dollars. So I need people to come to support the operations, which ultimately supports the animals. But at the same time, from the mission component, we need to build those connections. And hopefully you're inspired to take action in your own lives to go along with conservation and to the care of our species.
Big cats, if you're asking. Those are my favorite animals. But, I'm curious kind of from that standpoint of the conservation message, the education message. You want people to find their favorite animal. So how do you create the experience where people can have that opportunity within the zoo?
And it looks different for every person, right? Because everybody is different and everybody has things that are important to them. So we start with the very basics of what do visitors need. We spend a lot of time talking about what our animals need and how are we meeting both their physical and mental needs. Well, we have to look at that from our visitor standpoint as well. So how are we meeting the needs of our visitors when they come, from their basic needs to more of their intellectual needs? So how are we teaching people or getting them excited or inspired about something that's a part of our mission, whether it be an animal or a conservation program or something along those lines. And then we need to build in experiences for different age groups too. So a child that is 6 months old or a year old is going to need a different experience than adults would. So making sure that we have those experiences on a wide spectrum. And then I want to look at experiences that you cannot do anywhere else in the state of Iowa. So feeding a giraffe. That's one of my favorite animals, you know. So you cannot feed a giraffe anywhere else in the state of Iowa. And so this is a unique experience that people can have here. Watching our sea lion demo and interacting with our zookeepers. We build in a lot of enrichment for our animals, which then can also be translated into experiences for people too, because animals are interacting in a different way with people. We look at our exhibit design. So can you get close to our animals? Because if you come to the zoo and you walk around and you see a lot of empty spaces, that's not meeting your needs as a visitor either. So how can we build in opportunities to not only see and get close to our animals, but are also meeting the welfare of our animals' needs as well. So looking at it from that standpoint. Our education messages can be everything from our signage to you know, our keeper chats or volunteers that are out talking about the animals. It could be, again, going back to our exhibit design, is can we reverse it where instead of animals be restricted to a space, can we restrict people to a space and the animals can free roam? So in our Australia area, we have free ranging wallabies and we have a path. People have to stay on the path, but the wallabies can go wherever they want to go. And so it's kind of reversing that experience from what you would normally see at an institution like a zoo or an aquarium. We also can look at how do we welcome everybody here? So are there different needs that people have? And there's always different needs and there's always things that we can do differently to make sure that we're a welcoming and safe place for everybody in our community and everybody that visits us. So again, thinking about we have a program, we work with Culture City where we set up like headphone zones for anybody that has sensory needs, or do we have quiet zones if people need to kind of get away, because sometimes it's literally a zoo here and so it can be kind of wild sometimes. And so how do we set up those needs if you just need to get away from maybe the chaos and noise a little bit? Or what if you know, how can we set up our map, for example, utilizing more symbols so that you can navigate the zoo without having to have English as your first language? Or how are you experiencing the zoo if maybe you have a disability? And so looking at it from all different perspectives and all different lenses. And I think it's a never ending, it never ends. I mean, there's always something that can be done better. So really having those conversations. I don't know if that answer got a little bit deeper, but
It's awesome.
So, and you originally started at the zoo more than 23 years ago. So I imagine that all the things you just described, you've been able to really be a part of a lot of those changes or those implementations. And curious as far as just what you have observed, thinking, you know, rewinding 23 years ago to now, a lot of the large changes that you've seen at the zoo.
Right. And I would say it's not only just at our organization, but just as an industry in general. And it really could carry over to just our attractions. You know, a lot of our colleagues, you know, all across the country have a lot of different changes. So here, of course, you can talk about our physical changes. So just some of the new exhibit areas that we've built, everything from redoing some of our barn spaces and our education signage. We've added our rhinos. That was one of our newest animals. So we have rhinos and red river hogs and an aviary that we added. Our Discovery Center was one of the first things that was added when I first started here. So in the past, the Discovery Center is an indoor rainforest area with aquariums and classroom spaces. So we did not have any indoor space prior to that. So now we have indoor spaces in those areas. So. And then I think from an industry standpoint, I would say the emphasis on animal welfare has really evolved over that time. And so that's something that we've always looked at, but we look at it in a little bit of a different way. And one of the biggest changes I've seen is really not only are we meeting the physical needs of the animal, but really focusing on that social and that mental need of the animal. So is that animal a social animal? Is it a solitary animal? How can we model that as best as possible? And then how can we give our animals choice? So making sure that they're comfortable and they have the choice to decide where they want to go in their environment and how they want to interact within their environment.
So I'm glad you kind of brought it back around to the mental health of the animals, because you touched on that a minute ago, and I wanted to see if we could dive a little deeper into that, because, I see so many times when people will say, well, the animals look sad or they look unhealthy, whatever it is that a a non-animal professional is judging that animal to look like. And I'm curious, what kind of maybe insight can you provide to people that are not animal experts, that when you see an animal, this is normal behavior? And I'm not asking you to go through all 3,000 animals that you have there, but maybe just some guidelines of things that we should be watching for as an animal enthusiast going to a zoo, to see what should we be looking for in terms of a healthy animal, mentally and physically.
Sure. And I can talk for the next 4 hours on this. We can go through all different species, because it is definitely an area of passion and of interest of mine. So when we talk about animals, and oftentimes you're projecting either your own feelings or you're anthropomorphizing, that animal. So we have to be really careful about that. And this is where a lot of it gets back to the science of that animal. So some of the things that we do here, and I'll just speak, from what we do here, is we really want to get back to what is the science of that animal. So how does that animal act in the wild, and what we call the, wild, if it was, out. Are there behaviors that we know from research out in the wild that we want that animal to be able to do here? So, a lion, I hear that often. Well, the lion looks sad. Well, lions sleep 20 hours a day. So the lion sleeping is a good thing. That is part of their natural behavior. That means they're comfortable and, they're happy. If they're not doing their natural behavior, that's where we have to start thinking about their welfare, and are there things that we can do different. So it starts with just knowing what is natural for that animal, and every species is different. So every species has different natural behaviors that we look at. Then we do observations, and this is where our staff really comes into play. So they know what the normal behavior is of that animal, and then they monitor it every day. So they will do their observations every day. And then we also do what we call welfare assessments that are done periodically. And so depending on the species, they might be done more frequently or they might be done less frequently, depending. And so in that formal welfare assessment, we're not only taking our zookeepers, but we involve our vet, we involve other areas in the zoo, like our education staff, our guest services staff, to say, okay, how do we think this animal looks? And is it pacing? So if an animal is pacing, that often means there's some type of stress to it. Are they panting? Is that can be associated with stress? Do they have any patches on their skin that are worn out? Like if they're continually doing the same path over and over again, are they wearing out, some of their fur in different areas? If you're a bird, are you feather plucking? And what could be a sign of stress? So just understanding what all those signs of stress are, and then applying that into our observations. And then if there is a sign of stress, how do we adapt it? So is it maybe they don't like their environment? If it's a bird, can we change their perching? If it's a mammal, do we need to add more shade, or do they need a different pathway, or do we need to change up their routine? And so there's a lot of different things that we can look at that are all species specific. So yeah, but again, I think for me, it's really getting back to the science of it and having those concrete behaviors that we can look at, and understanding what their natural behavior is. So like I said, I'll bring up the lion as an example. They sleep 20 hours a day. So a lion that's laying on his rock snoozing is a good thing.
I'm curious then of taking all of that and looking at it through the lens of the guest and telling that story to the most passive guest walking by, saying, well, the lion's sleeping, the lion's sad, and then even like projecting that out of saying, well, if they're sleeping all the time, they must be malnourished because they don't have the knowledge that the lion sleeps 20 hours a day. And I'm trying to think of all the wrong things that a guest might think who doesn't know, but the way that they then take that, they leave the zoo, and then that becomes a Google review, and then that now it spirals out of it kind of or snowballs out, I should say. Is it as simple as putting up a sign that says the lions sleep 20 hours, and like that is the education piece, or weaving it into the keeper talks? I'm just curious as far as of really assuring the guest of everything, but with 3,000 species and to the one who might not think to ask the question, but will make an assumption.
Right. You just identify the hardest part of our job. So, so I think it's really trying to educate people in many different ways and meeting them where they're at. So yes, we can have signage, but there's a lot of research out there about how much do people actually read the signage. So if somebody was interested and likes reading the signage, we can have the information on there. For me, this is where I think that one-on-one interaction and that one-on-one engagement becomes really important. So doing keeper chats, having volunteers out and about, just having staff out on the grounds where people can interact and ask questions. And then we can explain, all the things that we look at and the things that we do for the animals that are here and call it home. Another form of engagement is even outside of your zoo visit is just our social media stories. So really looking at can we do behind the scenes videos and behind the scenes stories talking about how we care for the animals and how we're engaging with our animals in different ways daily that people can see before they even come to the zoo, or posting those stories, either through our YouTube channels or through our Facebook and Instagram channels. So I think it comes down to how can we do it in different platforms and in different ways. Our classes is another really great way. We do a lot of education programs. And so making sure that we're engaging people at a young age so that they're understanding that, as well. So, and then just, another way, again, is promoting our accreditation. So only about 10% of the zoos in the country achieve accreditation through the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So think about all the people or all the institutions around that have standards, and we have standards that we have to follow with our permitting. But AZA, which stands for the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, they're an accrediting body that takes all those standards and raises the bar even higher. And so that's why only 10% achieve it. And so we're very proud to be the only zoo in Iowa that has achieved accreditation and be part of that 10%. So that's where, again, we learn from each other. We can work with other zoos if we are seeing a behavior that maybe is a little bit unique or we haven't seen before. And then we can also make sure that we're following all the guidelines and standards that are required of us.
Anne, you just mentioned something really interesting. And as you talked about the behind the scenes material that you can share on social media and telling your story that way. And I'm wondering, does that change the way that you tell the story when people are on site? For example, if people are kind of starting the story on social media and then they come on site and then they, maybe finish the story afterwards, or does that just elongate the opportunity that you have to, share your story about conservation and education and make you look at things a little different in terms of that whole experience?
Oh gosh, I would look at social media as hopefully continuing that engagement with people and kind of elongating it. So I think it's really, if you're curious about something, or it could be something like, hey, I had no idea that you do welfare assessments on your fish, and that there's really a lot of science that goes behind, how we care for our fish, would be a good example of that. And so I think hopefully it's engaging people because something might pop up that maybe they didn't even know about or didn't even know could be an interest, of theirs. And then when they're here, hopefully they'll kind of remember some of those stories and look at things a little bit differently while they are here as well. But I think public perception is something that's really important and we need to really think about and be aware of, and again, continually engage with people in different ways. But I love those social media stories that we can really kind of tell a little bit of some of those things that you wouldn't necessarily know if you were just coming to the zoo, and kind of that behind the scenes look.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the positive of social media.
Yeah.
Well, and then I think of it as, social media naturally is marketing, but it also falls into the education pillar of the organization as well. So yes, there is a marketing aspect of it too, but it is also, maybe it's sparking curiosity before a guest's visit, that then continues. Maybe they're going to ask to maybe see that behind the scenes area, or they're going to actually come in with preset questions that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And then the follow-up, if they see the, the continual engagement afterwards, then that is the inspiration to take action beyond their initial visit. So it's, it's hard to pigeonhole social media into saying this is marketing because we're trying to amplify the brand and sell tickets. It also is education too. So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
And I think they play into each other. I mean, I think some of that education, hopefully people are inspired to come visit because they're seeing some of those educational components, even though it wasn't necessarily targeted as, a sale for tickets. But could hope maybe ultimately turn into a sale for tickets. Or if you have somebody that is like, zoos just really aren't my thing. I feel bad. The animals are in cages. So hopefully by, opening up their mind a little bit and saying, okay, well, here are why we are here. These are why the animals are here. This is why they're so important that they are here. And here's how we're caring for them. One of the things I love about some of our visitors nowadays is that they are more educated and they care more about kind of the ethics behind it. And so that's what I want our visitors to feel. I want our visitors to know that here are the things that we are doing, and be comfortable with our procedures and our welfare standards.
So certainly, especially with your AZA accreditation, you are doing what's ethically right for the animals. But what you just said was very interesting as well, because you said, you like the fact that people are more interested in that, and they care more about the ethics that the animals are being cared for under. So does that then inform you of further decisions that you might make in terms of how an animal is, not necessarily cared for, because I'm sure that's already very high quality, but the way that they're portrayed, or again, those stories that are being told?
Absolutely. And so it was interesting. I actually was just at a college class today talking about this. So we talked about how do we decide what animals come to the zoo and how do we decide what our exhibits are. And so we have a kind of a matrix that we go through. And a lot of things that we'll go through is, can we provide for the physical needs of the animals? That's, a pretty obvious, easy one. But some of the more things that we talk about nowadays is, can we also provide for the social needs of that animal? Can we provide for the mental needs of that animal? Can we sustain the care of that animal financially, long into the future? Do we have enough space? I mean, we're only 30 acres. So do we have enough space that we can maintain that animal in a proper way? Is there a conservation story? So if we have this animal here, how are we impacting the long-term sustainability of that species? And so making sure that that is, one of the decisions. That's why all of our animals are here, because there's some type of conservation work that we are doing with that animal and that species in particular. Are there education messages that we can portray? So are there maybe misconceptions? So one of our new exhibits coming up is bobcat. And we have bobcats are pretty prevalent throughout Iowa now. We're starting to see a lot of human-animal conflict. So can we offer a home to a rehabbed animal that cannot survive on its own, but then in the return, share some of those misconceptions about those animals as people are interacting and having kind of, I'm going to call them run-ins, with bobcats in their backyard, and so how can we impact that species in a whole different way? So looking at it again from all those different components and pieces.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Wonder if we could switch gears a little bit here, because we know you became CEO in June of 2020, and without any additional context, the only question is,
I don't think there's any context needed.
yeah,
2020. That's
what was that like?
Yeah. Wow. That was quite the time. That was right away to like just jump right in. So I would say the advantage that I have is already being here. So I'm one of the unique people that has started and kind of continued in one location as opposed to, moving around. So having already been a part of our operations, I think gave me a little bit of an advantage. As far as leading us through 2020. I think the other advantage that we have is because we're a nonprofit, we have a board of directors, and we have a very active board of directors that are very I'm going to call them wonderful. They're very engaged, and they're a huge source of support. And one of the ways that they support us is just through their own knowledge and their own experiences. So all the people on our board either run their own businesses, are part of an organization, have other experiences that we can draw upon in various industries. So utilizing that areas of expertise, kind of helping us navigate it as well. But just like all the attractions, we were shut down. So we were closed for about 90 days, which the way our business model works is we earn all of our revenue in the summer months. So really that March, April is when it starts all the way through October. And then we have to earn enough revenue to carry us through winter because our expenses don't change. The animals have to be cared for, whether it's summer or winter. And so our expenses are pretty consistent, but our revenue, goes up and down. So, of course, it was right in, March, the beginning of April, May that we were closed. So right during the kind of the start of our revenue season. And then when we did open, we were allowed to open sooner than other organizations. We had that advantage because we were outside. So people can naturally space themselves, and we limited ticket sales. So we limited the number of people that were here on a daily basis to try and make it as safe of an atmosphere as possible when people came. But one of the things I kind of often reflect back on 2020 because there was some, I'm going to call them positives, that came out of it. And one of them is being able to look at things differently. So we took a little bit of a different approach. We were able to maintain our staff, and that was through actions that our board took, which was really exciting. So any of our full-time staff, we were able to maintain. And then we took the approach of, okay, your job's going to look different. So we're just telling everybody your job's gonna be different, be flexible. And so from an organizational standpoint, our animals became the #1 priority. So we had teams set up. We had an A and a B team that don't interact with each other because if one team had to go into quarantine, you still need to care for the animals. So we made sure that we had separation there. Well, when you split those animal care teams, they might not have enough man hours to care for the animals. So people that would normally have a guest services job, or maybe some of our educators or some of our office staff, became zookeepers. And so we got to work with our zookeeper teams. And so we had a lot of kind of crossover that way. So people got to learn different jobs and get to know somebody in a different department than they would normally work with. So I think there were some positives there. We also reached out to our community and said, okay, our community supports us all the time. How can we be of support to you at this time? And so the feedback that we got is they wanted some sense of normalcy, and they wanted something that they can do with their family, and they wanted something fun. And so we figured that is something that we can grasp onto. And so we used our social media channels quite a bit and did just some fun things, like we started our mayoral election. And so we had the presidential election during that time. So we did our own election that people can engage with. And it was a revenue opportunity from us, but that was actually really pretty minor compared to, we just wanted people to be able to engage with their animals in a different way. Engage with us through social media and video, and have kind of just those puns and that a little bit of fun that goes with it. We moved a lot of our education programs that we normally on in person onto Zoom, which we didn't even know what Zoom was beforehand. And so, utilizing Zoom and videos, and again, trying to provide that sense of normalcy where, a family that would normally bring their child to a preschool class can still participate and still have those experiences. But, story time, we would take cameras around the zoo and talk about the animals and show people what the animals were doing, and interact with those kids throughout the day. And then we looked at, okay, how can we provide experiences for your family? So we thought outside the box. We do a Halloween event with lights displays around the zoo. So we set up all those displays in our parking lot and did a drive-through lights display. I think the whole thing was like 7 minutes long. It was super simple, but it was something that people could do safely. So they can get in the car with their families, they can pack snacks, drive through the lights. It was right before, Easter. So we had my two kids I have two teenagers that got stuck doing it for the first weekend as they wore an Easter bunny costume and we had our mascot costume. And so they stood out in front and I just said, you need to wave at every single child that goes by. And so they sat there and waved at every car, that went by. And so we wound up, we were hoping to have maybe, 200 or 300 cars in a weekend come by, and we wound up having 600 cars the first night. And by the last night, we had over 1,500 cars that came through. And we were engaging people through social media. We were working with our police department to get permission to do it. And we wound up blocking up traffic all over because we had no idea, how many people were just needed to get out and do something like that in a safe way. And it did not cost anybody anything. It was just free for people. Again, our way of trying to provide things that our community needed at the time. So, yeah. And then our animals are fun because they were kind of like, well, there's no people here to watch anymore. So I think they watch us as much as we watch them. So really looking at their behaviors and, seeing what we need to do for their own care so that they're not bored as well. So.
That's so cool. So cool. So interesting how you took, what everybody was going through in terms of the shutdown and, the potential loss of jobs and things like that. And you really turned it into a lot of positivity for not only the organization, but for the community, which I think is so cool.
Right.
One of the things,
and there was so much negative going on. I think the biggest thing for us is, again, how can we have fun and try and transport people to just get a little bit of a break from reality, just even for a second. So, and that's kind of the approach that we took, not only with our own staff, because our own staff was going through the same issues, as everybody else was. But yeah, it was, and I don't want to call it, it was still an interesting time. But again, trying to look at how can we be that resource for people as a break.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think where I wanted to go with that too was to talk about your specific leadership style and kind of how that was able to, influence the team and bring about that positivity. So, can you talk a little bit about your influence and your leadership style?
So I very much love innovation and collaboration. And I think that was something that we really did here is we put it out to all of our staff and said, hey, no idea is bad right now. So let's throw out all these ideas and we can see what sticks. And so being able to support our staff in some of these ideas. So, our education classes would be example. We have a class for preschoolers, so 2 and 3 year olds. And so our educator, again, being able to maintain our staff was an advantage to us. And she said, I really want to take this class on Zoom. And then my question to her is, do you think 2-year-olds are going to watch a Zoom program? Are they going to be interested? And she's like, I don't know. Let's try. And I'm like, you know what? You're absolutely right. Let's try it. And so I came in, she had in our conference room, we have a TV screen set up so she could see everybody. And then she had her computer and she had a phone and another phone set up so they can see things like the book she was reading and the crafts that she was doing up close. And I walked in on her program and there was all the little faces like zoomed in, like right on her, paying attention. And she's singing songs with them and read books with them and had all those little faces and, engaged, even if it was for 20 minutes. And so I think that's where it was, is trying to make sure we had an environment where we weren't fearful of trying new things. And if it didn't work, we moved on to the next thing and being kind of nimble and flexible, especially during COVID that time. But I think that really kind of plays into, what we do now as well, is what is our vision, what is our mission, and how do we, if this isn't working, how do we try something that is to move forward? So, yeah.
So piggybacking off of Matt's question about your leadership style, I want to go back to something you said near the beginning of the interview, and it's when you said that you are the least important person here. And curious if we could unpack that and if we can get your mindset. Yeah.
I firmly believe that. I mean, I don't take care of the animals every day. I'm not out teaching the classes every day anymore. I mean, I did at one point, but I'm not the one greeting the visitors that come through. So I think that is something just in our environment and in our culture is really, hopefully everybody understands that no matter what your job is at the zoo, it's important. And it takes all of us to be able to create the experience for our guests that come through and for our animals. And it takes all of us to meet our mission. And so no matter what you do at the zoo, it's an important part of the organization. And so, yeah, I firmly believe I am the least important person here. So.
And I would imagine that plays out in the way that you approach certain situations. Even as we asked about your leadership style, the conversation very quickly went to what everybody else was achieving, through their innovation and things like that. And so you really get a sense that you really focused on the success of other people. And that's probably served you very well in the environment that you're in, I would imagine.
Right. I mean, I think there's obviously, I've started as an intern 28 years ago. And so there's definitely things I've lived through and experiences that I have, but I think I can use that knowledge and experience of how can I help remove barriers for, others. And so if somebody has a really great idea, okay, how can I provide the resources that you need and then, remove any barriers for accomplishing that? Because ultimately that's really impacting the entire organization. And so I think that's where I think taking ego out of it. I mean, I said, I'm usually love talking about the zoo and not so much about myself, but there's so many. I mean, we have a great staff. We have 90 full-time staff members here, and they all have different experiences and different ideas. And so being able to harness that and support them is probably what makes my job exciting.
So in the last few minutes that we have left here, I'm curious if we can kind of turn that into career advice that you would offer to aspiring executive leaders, whether in zoos or in attractions and recreation and cultural tourism, anywhere here.
Sure. So, I've unique because I've been at one organization for a long time, and where a lot of times people have to move around, to grow in their career. So I've been lucky in that way. But I think some of the lessons that I've learned and what I talk to our staff here is, first, I think always want to learn. So every day should be a learning opportunity. So always look for what is that lesson for the day. And I still, to this day, every day, there's a different learning opportunity. I get to be on a podcast for the first time. So, so just always looking at how can we continually grow, both personally and can we help the organization grow? The second thing is I always say is everything is your job. So I think in my own career, how I grew is if there was something that needed to be done, I didn't care if it was in my job description or not, as I just did it. And I looked at it as an opportunity to try and learn something different. And to grow that experience. And I have to be honest, I never aspired to be the CEO. That was not in my career path. I loved doing operations. I loved the education component. Didn't really even consider the CEO component. But as the years kind of went by, hey, there's this need in this area. Can you do that? Absolutely. It was never a question. I would just take on that challenge. And I think that's what kept my career exciting, is having those challenges and continuing that growth. And so that's what I recommend to people is if you have the opportunity, take that challenge on and run with it. And I'll try and create those opportunities for you. But I said that's what has really kept me excited. Titles weren't really important to me. Like I said, I never aspired to be the CEO. What was important to me is continually having challenges that I get to, have and learn from every day. It was more exciting to me than a title.
That's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing that, Anne. And as Josh said, we are getting to the end, but I just have one last question. You mentioned earlier that giraffes are your favorite animal. So why?
So officially on record, I have no favorites. I love them all.
Understood. Understood.
Yeah. But in private, the giraffe are I have several favorites, but the giraffe are definitely one of my favorites. I don't know. They're just such a unique animal with their long necks. They're kind of graceful and captivating, all at the same time. They have these long tongues. I love it because you can interact with them. They all have personalities. And so getting to know each of their personalities, and they're kind of like gentle giants in a lot of ways. And so I think just their coloration and just how they move is just kind of captivating to me. And then definitely being able to interact with them. So yes, Jacoby is the name of our big male. He is one of my favorite animals in the zoo, but you did not hear that.
We won't tell anybody.
Yes, don't tell anybody.
And Blank Park Zoo is the only place in the state of Iowa where you can feed a giraffe.
That is right.
Yeah, there
Yes.
you go. All
So you
right.
can come meet Jacoby. And so, yeah, we have our feeding stations open. On our website, we have our schedule to be able to interact with him. But yeah, he is a pretty special animal. But each animal, what I've learned over the years is its own unique. Gosh, each one is so unique and has their own story. And believe it or not, all of our animals, even down to like a tortoise. One of my other favorite animals is our tortoise, who's almost 100 years old and weighs 500 pounds. And he has a personality. When I started in the zoo field, never would have guessed that a tortoise would be my favorite animal, and that he does have a personality and is very smart. So.
Nice. So if people want to learn more about Blank Park Zoo, or if they want to get a hold of you directly or say hi on the socials, where would you send them?
So I would send them to our website. That's our best resource. So blankparkzoo.com, or you can go and engage with us on Facebook. That's another great way, on our socials, or on Instagram. YouTube, we have quite a collection of videos and behind the scenes videos on the YouTube channel for Blank Park Zoo. So the best ways to engage are those things. And we have something hatching that's coming up that will be announced this summer. So you'll have to stay tuned for more.
Exactly. Keep your eyes open for that. So, Anne, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time and all of your inspiration about animals and animal welfare and all the wonderful things we got to talk about today. And for everybody out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.